Mila.
There, okay. All right. Welcome everyone to our June webinar hosted by the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park. I'm Mila Stroganoff, your host and facilitator for today's lecture. It's a lovely day and thank you all for taking the time to join us. We have good news. This lecture will be recorded and posted on our website and available in approximately 2 weeks' time. And for all the lepidopterists out there, anyone interested in insects, pollinators, and their decline in numbers, this lecture is definitely for you. As you may be aware, the Friends will be taking a break from webinars during the summer. This will give both you and me a chance to take a break. But if you would, please drop Adrian, and that's my husband and my IT wizard here right beside me, as well as the Friends membership director. Send him an email if you would, a short sentence or two about how you would like programming to take place in the fall. We know COVID's sort of easing up now, restrictions are easing up, but would you like the lectures to take place in person at the visitor center? Would you like to continue with webinars or some combination of both? This will help me to get a better feel for future programming and which speakers to select. Okay, so thank you on that score. I hope to hear from you through Adrian's email. The Friends of San Pedro Valley Park would also like to ask you to consider becoming members. You can do so online or by sending a check. Memberships run from about $20 to $35 per year and help us to keep things running. This would be greatly appreciated, and all information about becoming a member, all that information is on the website. So www.friendsofsanpedrovalley.org. We have at least 8 recorded webinars on our website at this point, dealing with various natural history topics given by renowned specialists in their fields. So if you have some time, check them out. They are both educational and interesting, loaded with lots of information. And the website is exactly the same as I've just given you, friendsofsanpedrovalley.org. So please enter and write your questions in the Q&A section and not chat. It's easier if everything is in one location, and then press enter. Don't forget the enter, because that way we will, if we don't press enter, so we can get it virtually and we can get to the questions. Questions will be taken and answered at the end of the lecture, and I'll be back to facilitate questions at the end of the talk. And now I will introduce today's speaker. You can see her on the screen already. Kim Young is with us. Kimberley Young is a Xerces Society Ambassador, a California native who grew up learning about native flora and fauna. Kimberley gardens with California native plants and helps to improve habitat for declining species and teaches effective conservation methods. She owns a 10-acre regenerative teaching farm and teaches about soil health, biodiversity, and restoration. She is a UC Master Gardener, but her main love is helping others to learn about the need to protect our planet Earth, its wildlife, and its importance for our survival. So I will hand this over to Kim and leave it up to her for a most wonderful lecture.
Thank you so much, Mila. I really appreciate that. I am so honored to be invited to speak, and to Friends of San Pedro Valley Park is really dear to me. Of course, I'm, as Mila introduced me, as a California native, and I really love the park, the work that you do as a conservation group. I just feel so honored to be invited to present to you. Before I start, please know that all the links that I will be mentioning, I will be sending to Mila, that she could, she'll have them available for you for a follow-up email from her. And also, if you have any questions, please don't hold back. No question is too basic. This is what I'm here for, to teach monarch conservation, and it could be the most basic question or advanced question. That's what I'm here for, so please don't hold back. And we're going to address a lot of issues and move through a lot of information quickly, so the questions are probably going to be plentiful, because there are so many issues regarding monarch butterflies, especially Western monarchs, because as you have probably heard in the media, the Western monarchs are in crises, and we are going to be talking why. First, if I may tell you, let me get my next screen up. Just a second. We are the Xerces Society, and in case you have not heard of us, for those that haven't, first of all, our name. The Xerces Society was named after the Xerces blue butterfly, a butterfly that many scientists believe was the first butterfly to go extinct and was last seen in 1943. Its habitat was the San Francisco Peninsula, and Xerces, this butterfly, the Xerces blue, is on the far right corner here. Xerces is a national organization. We have regional offices all over the country, from a handful when we first started in the 70s to now multiple scientists work in the conservation for invertebrates. We do community engagement and talk about pollinator conservation especially, and endangered species. What happened? The Western Monarch population crash. In 2019, I wanted to show you this graph because this shows how rapidly it is happening. In 2019, there were 29,418 Western Monarch butterflies. That was devastating in 2019 because monarch scientists have predicted that monarchs go under the threshold of 30,000 butterflies. Is there a chance for recovery and a rebound? Okay, so 2019 was devastation. Then 2020 happened. Many predicted a bad year. I know I did. I had only seen 3 on my property last year, and I have an abundance of milkweed. I knew it would be a bad year. But then the counts came out and the low numbering was staggering. Less than 2,000 Western Monarch butterflies at overwintering sites. This has been called an extinction vortex of Western Monarch butterflies by monarch scientists. This, as you will see, hasn't exactly been gradual. It's actually been predicted for quite some time. In 2014, Xerces, the Center for Biological Diversity, Center for Food Safety, and Dr. Lincoln Bauer filed a petition for protection for the monarch butterfly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after a 90% decline. The ruling arrived December 15th, 2020, this last December, and the ruling was that the monarch butterfly was warranted but precluded. That meant for the protection that the petition sought. This means that the monarch met all criteria that of being put on the endangered species list for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, but that it was precluded, meaning that there are other species on the waiting list ahead of the monarch butterfly, which warranted it would not be put on right now. The monarch will be reviewed on a yearly basis, but as of now, it's a wait and watch situation. When monarch scientists talk about the decline, they often use the term death by 1,000 cuts because there isn't one factor. It's environmentally many. But this decline is also always being studied by the scientists. The main reasons right now are degradation of overwintering sites and the loss and degradation of breeding and migrating habitat, and climate is changing. It's getting hotter and drier. Climate change on a migrating butterfly is huge, and pesticide use. Also, one of the main factors for California is that we don't know really what our wildfires are doing to the Western Monarch migration through the wildfire smoke. We do know that it does absolutely affect a huge increase in habitat loss, nectar loss. A migrating butterfly will always have many factors regarding survival, and they're not always easy to study a migrating butterfly. More studies are needed on many different areas regarding Western monarchs, and they are being conducted on a continual basis because monarchs have so many factors and exposures that they face. And as an example, the non-target toxicity of pesticides to monarchs in this one, as an example of that is an aerial ag spray. That is not a target chemical that can take out beneficial pollinators, such as a monarch butterfly, and even a mosquito spray is not a target chemical. It used to be believed that migrating butterflies, because they migrate, would find what they need, but it's actually been discovered that the opposite, that those challenges become greater for monarchs. Monarchs also need that Goldilocks microclimate, and that is an important factor, that Goldilocks word, because monarchs are seeking the right temperature and humidity continually to survive. The California coast, of course, offers that humidity, but our climate inland is getting hotter and drier, and studies are being conducted to see how monarchs are reacting to the changing climate, but we are not entirely sure yet. One of the things we have to discuss, since Pacifica is so close to the ocean, is that milkweed should not be planted within 5 miles of the coast of California. There's often a lot of questions I get asked of why. Milkweed should only be planted where it has historically grown, endemically grown in California. That hasn't been the coast. But why it's more of a important reason is it can interfere with migratory behavior. Scientists have studied that monarchs that are overwintering and there is milkweed growing will sometimes not go into reproductive diapause, which is important. And they don't need milkweed by the coast, they need nectar. So with monarchs having climate change of hotter and drier, what happens is they have a shorter lifespan, and even milkweed is affected by hotter and drier. The milkweeds are tough plants, but like a lot of plants, that brutal beating sun does dry them out. And a female monarch can pass over a milkweed that does not have enough humid content in their leaves. The changing climate is, of course, affecting our trees that monarch butterflies roost in in the overwintering sites. A lot of our native trees, such as oaks, Monterey pines, Monterey cypress, they count on that annual rainfall of the winter. And I also wanted to touch on that monarchs. I get a question a lot about eucalyptus trees. Actually, eucalyptus, they don't need eucalyptus trees, monarchs. It is an introduced species. They use eucalyptus trees because they're there. And because of that microclimate that we talked about, they're always searching for a microclimate and protection from wind and adequate shelter to roost. So they're using wherever they can get that. It's not that they want a eucalyptus tree, it's that microclimate. It's just that introduced tree, a non-native tree, eucalyptus, is there. And if it provides wind shelter, they're going to use it. Also, monarchs don't stay at an overwintering site the whole winter. They can move along the coast, again, looking for that microclimate. So it's always temperate on regarding temperature, and the wind is pretty tough on them, could break their wings and stuff like that. A priority zone map has been developed for Western monarchs. Of course, your area is in priority number 1. Priority number 1 is really crucial because when monarchs come back to the overwintering sites and they enter reproductive diapause, where when they migrate and they come to the coast, monarchs go into reproductive diapause where that last generation, which is often called the super generation because it is the generation that lives the longest, sometimes can live months to survive through the winter and then create the next generation. They leave the overwintering sites and then they are on search for nectar and milkweed. And if it is not in this area of priority 1, a lot of monarch scientists are suspecting we are losing them in the first generation. There is they're really needing nectar, often there's not enough. And so that priority 1, this map was established where it is the most important place to put resources. Not that the whole state isn't important, but priority 1 area is the most crucial. This is the migration map from Xerces that shows the direction the Western monarchs migrate west of the Rockies and the Eastern monarchs east of the Rockies. They are the same butterfly. They have the same genetics. It's just called Western and Eastern population because of the direction that they do migrate. This is older, and so if we did this currently, it would be very different dates. We're going to talk about that because Western monarchs now leave California overwintering sites a lot sooner than they ever did before because of our changing climate. What brings a monarch out of reproductive diapause is temperature, environmental factors. So often they would leave in February, March. Now they're often leaving in January, sometimes not even going into reproductive diapause if there are factors there that prevent that. And if we lose a migrating population, because I often ask that question, okay, we lose our migrating Western monarchs. Is that such a bad idea to have a resident population? Yes, because there is more disease and infection overload, and we'll go into that. And that is why it is not ideal health-wise for Western monarchs to lose their migration. I put this in again because there's so many people and so many groups doing conservation. This is one of my favorite monarch artists, Jane Kim, who did a huge wall mural in San Francisco in the Tenderloin for bringing awareness. And with your area, you've probably seen it. I should have put a photo of that. I did not. Now let's briefly talk about, we need to cover biology so that we can best understand their habitat needs. This metamorphosis for this iconic butterfly is fascinating, but to understand the challenges for a migrating butterfly, and this is where community scientists can help. On the left is a female butterfly. As you can see, her veins are much thicker than the male on the right. The male has thinner veins than the female, and the males right here have pheromone patches, which are called androconal patches, that emit pheromones to hopefully attract females. After they leave the overwintering site, and sometimes even at the overwintering sites, they will mate, and then the migrating generation only lives 1 to 6 weeks. So a lot is going to be having to happen in that very short period of time. A female monarch in the wild can lay 300 to 400 eggs in her lifespan, and a female monarch will only lay her eggs on the host plant for her caterpillars, which is milkweed. This is Faticularis, which is our most common milkweed for California, and I will talk a lot about what can really be planted and where to help their survival the most. Monarchs, in their biology, they have 5 instars. So that here's that egg that we saw her laying, and then that egg breaks open, it eats its shell and immediately starts eating, and will usually cut a little bit of milkweed in a circle. And this is the first instar, second, third, fourth, and fifth. When it gets to full development, let's talk first about the need for milkweed. A lot of people are planting milkweed in their home gardens and not planting enough. They'll plant one plant and they'll get a monarch that lays an egg, and then it takes a lot of milk. They are very hungry to get to that 5th instar, and then people are panicking. It's really important to plant non-native milkweeds. We're going to talk about that. So if you're going to plant milkweed, please plant enough, at least 6 plants. It takes at least 30 leaves or more for one monarch caterpillar to get to its 5th instar and then start to form its chrysalis. So we need to have enough milkweed planted because the female could lay more than, of course, 1 egg on that milkweed. This is the monarch chrysalis. It is 8 to 15 days before it ecloses. That is, again, weather dependent. And then this is the monarch caterpillar chrysalis eclosing, which is erupting from its chrysalis, which is in nature one of the most fascinating and magnificent metamorphoses. This jade green chrysalis, one of the most beautiful, has these gold dots. All milkweed species do. It usually turns black right before it ecloses and then transparent. Here it has just eclosed, pumping into its wings and just about ready to fly. Here are the two most common milkweeds for our state. It's Peticularis on the left, which is, its common name is narrowleaf, and speciosa, which is often called showy. This one is from my garden, and this is huge. It's huge every year, needs a lot of room. This one is a better one for a smaller garden, but remember that you have to be a distance from the coast. But these two are the easiest to find. Peticularis in California is the easiest to find, and monarchs do love that milkweed. That all flowers on milkweeds are really beautiful. We are talking about early emerging milkweeds more and more because with the climate changing and them and monarchs leaving the overwintering sites so early, a lot of milkweeds haven't erupted yet. A lot of them don't erupt until March, April, and that is a problem. If they don't have the milkweed that they need, we'll lose them in the first generation. Californica is one that can grow. That is one of our early emergers, but it is hard to find and a little more difficult to grow. It does like the foothills. Its native range is quite huge in the Bay Area, but a lot of subdivision development knocked out a lot of our californica. We're really trying to get this one back. And then on the bottom row is the cordifolia, which is called heartleaf. Both are really beautiful milkweeds, as you can see, and those two native milkweeds, much work is being done to increase the amount of that are being grown in California. Here's two from my garden that I wanted to show you, the seed pod, that if you grow milkweed, that you can collect the seed. Here's a blossom bag, just a regular gossamer favor bag. You tie it on. Milkweed bugs, do like to eat the seeds, so that is important. It also helps for when you're going to propagate for more milkweed plants, that you have your regional seed and then you can share with your neighbors. This one is from Speciosa, and this one is Peticularis. Here's that narrow leaf. The flowers, of course, are beautiful, but you don't want to lose those seeds to the wind. So if you're going to grow, I really recommend those blossom bags, and these let airflow through, which is really important because if you don't have airflow, they will rot. Here again is californica, and I wanted you to see a bigger photo for the foothills. And then also here is a milkweed conservation guide. If you are interested, I will be sending Mila the link for that too. And it is a conservation guide for learning about milkweeds, for especially for California, and how to grow them. And it covers everything in there if you get very interested. And milkweeds are fascinating. Milkweed support far more than monarchs. A lot of our native pollinators love milkweed. It supports wildlife tremendously. This one is Speciosa. The flowers are huge, and here are two native bees, a bumblebee on the Speciosa. It's really important to look for pesticide-free milkweeds. There has been a study from the University of Nevada and Xerces, where several milkweeds were tested. I think in total 220, and all milkweeds were found, whether planted in the ground or from a nursery, that they had pesticide residue, which is sublethal to monarchs. Milkweed does have a lot of pests, especially oleander aphids and that type, and commercial growers treat it systemically with neonicotinoids, which it can be sublethal, as I said, and they are long lasting. This is becoming more important with not sure, after a wild monarch uses the milkweed and killer, how it is affecting their lifespan. So we need to pay a lot of attention to our milkweed plants and our pollinator plants, that they are pesticide free. I have called a lot of the majority of the commercial growers in California, and they cannot, as they said, guarantee that their plants are pesticide free on delivery to get it looking good for market. So our local native nurseries become more important than ever because they do not use those chemicals. Xerces has a new publication out that I will also be sending the link that you can download on buying safe plants for your pollinators and your pollinator gardens and the habitat establishment that we're going to be talking about. This will be consumer driven, because the only way that we can move this forward is letting them know we are trying to support pollinators and that we want our plants systemic chemical free, and it won't happen until consumers drive this. The one on the left is for the consumer, and the publication on the right is for the consumer to hand to their local nursery and even box store. Now we need to talk about the problem that is a huge issue for California with our temperate climate, tropical milkweed. It was grown in popularity. Box stores sell it at huge volumes. It was pushed in popularity by people who hand raise butterflies especially. They liked using it because it kept growing in the winter, and it is a problem because these non-native milkweeds can become invasive. But what is really problematic about it is because it does not die down to the ground like native milkweeds, it holds a lot of disease load on it, and it's problematic with OE, which is a protozoan parasite that collects on the plant, and a monarch lands on it, gets on its abdomen, and continually spreads those spores that it collects. The tropical is almost always sold with systemic chemicals. Every grower in California, I called every single one that grew tropical milkweed. Again, that one is even worse, treated systemically. And it is also a pretty one with the orange and yellow flowers. And the box stores just continually have that. So that one is, there's a lot of studies, a study right here that I put of the link of how it is even affecting reproduction for monarch butterflies. Okay, we've talked a lot about the caterpillars. Now, what caterpillars need milkweed, but what do adult monarch butterflies need? And I'm first going to show you this photo because I like this little drawing because it accomplishes a lot of how we can make a difference. Across the street here was a patch of soil, and somebody decided I can plant some native nectar there and some milkweeds and support a lot of declining species. And they planted it and planted across the street in a little bank there. And here comes a lot of beneficial pollinators and monarchs. And the other part is this organic farm here. The organic farms are really known for hedgerows, which hedgerows are usually native shrubs that support beneficial insects and give natural biological control on organic farms. So when we support our organic farmer, they are really helping our beneficial pollinators. And then here is a homeowner who has lawn, gave up part of their lawn to plant some native nectars, looks like even a patch of milkweed, and monarchs love sunflowers here. But in our Monterey, in our California climate, our Mediterranean arid dry climate, it takes a lot of water for a lawn, especially in a bank like this where it runs. And I find beauty in a full front yard of nectar plants far more beautiful and interesting, and holding a lot less use for water. So this one just shows all the potential. Okay, we need more pollinator-friendly gardens. Increasing habitat is what is going to make the difference. And in our own gardens, it is being shown we are making a huge difference. And the popularity for pollinator gardens is growing exponentially because of so many like you that know the importance of our native pollinators, how efficient they are in pollinating, how so many are declining besides monarchs. Many other native butterflies and native bees are declining, and our gardens are making a huge difference. Now, what do we need to fuel all that movement of migrating butterflies? Here it's showing a native manzanita, which is an early spring bloomer, which is really important. And here is a non-native plant, a popsicle verbena. Both will support monarchs and nectar sources, and that's what we're really going to talk about, because it doesn't have to be just native. So we're going to cover that, and the that can help too. So what can we do to help monarch butterflies plant high quality nectar plants wherever you can? If you could even a pot on a patio, that will, even one pot of nectar plants can help. What does that mean, high quality nectar plants though? Plants that ooze nectar that attract pollinators. Usually, yes, that is native plants, and we'll talk about why. And how do you find those? Well, support your local native nurseries. And in California, we have a great organization. Our Native Plant Society is amazing. California Native Plant Society support their local chapter plant sales. And when you find your California Native Plant Society chapter, sign up for their newsletters. They will notify you by email when their plant sales will be held. And that is often a spring and a fall plant sale. Also, it is the perfect time for a talk that Mila organized for planning, because often a native plant likes a fall planting, so that they can develop roots in the fall before bloom out in the spring, and that fall planting really helps them to get a stronger foundation. I also put here your local California Plant Society chapter email address. Okay, now let's talk about native and non-native. First, why always so many conservation groups talk about native plants and why. Native nectar, here's another link. I will be sending this link of native nectar for California, but why native? And also, if you don't live on the coast, here this one link will be the Central Valley, but I'll also talk about a Central Coast list. Native plants have a very long history of naturally occurring in the wild ecosystems of a given area, pre-European settlement of the Americas. Non-native plants naturally occur in other parts of the world or the country, but may grow well in your area as ornamental or garden plants. Some non-native plants have the tendency to escape into the wild and become invasive, replacing native plants and causing serious ecological and economic problems. Although pollinators may find some nutritional value from non-native plants, native plants do the best job of supporting the widest array of native pollinators, given their long co-evolutionary history. In fact, roughly 1/3 of native bee species will only collect pollen from particular native plants, and most butterfly and moth caterpillars can only feed on particular native plant leaves. Here's from Xerces a native nectar plant list for California. I will, of course, be sending the link to that. And it will show right here the bloom time, which is always really important because we're going to be wanting to really concentrate on those early spring nectar plants for when they leave the overwintering sites, and fall when they come back to California and they're trying to fuel up to last through the winter storms. And that fall nectar is crucially important. So that early spring and late fall, late summer, late fall blooming plants are crucially important. Here is also a Central California coast plant guide that I couldn't get the photo up. Here is the range, but the Central Coast one covers the San Francisco area too. And that one is fantastic. And I'll also be sending Mia a Central Coast spreadsheet that I did for the Central Coast specifically also. Here is the list, how it looks. It's 2 pages of the different plant guides. I know many of you probably know about Calscape and Calflora, but I had to include this because they are incredibly valuable resources when it comes to finding nectar plants for California. You can put your address in right here in Calscape, and it will show you the nectar sources for the area, and then you could even compare that with the Monarch list that I will be sending. But this is valuable. I didn't do a separate page for Calflora, but it is as useful as Calscape. They're both highly invaluable. I use them both tremendously. Xerces has a new book that was released this spring on 100 plants to feed monarchs, and it talks about native and non-native plants, and of course it talks a lot about milkweed too. And some of the non-native plants that are talked about in the book, and that we wanted to talk that it doesn't always have to be native. Monarch butterflies love cosmos. They love sunflowers, tithionia, echinacea, zinnias. The real key is those single petal flowers. They don't like multi-petal flowers. Often those plants that are bred for a multi-petal, sometimes nectar is sacrificed. And so they'll want a single petal flower where they can get that proboscis down and get that nectar out. I did a few photos for your area of native nectar. This one is one that I grow that I really love. It's a buckwheat. If you have just a small space, a patio, it could be put in a pot. It's a great border plant. It's low to the ground and loaded with blossoms. A very high monarch value plant. There are many different types for your area. California coast and naked buckwheat are coastal, and they're gorgeous. I wanted to show this close-up of a California buckwheat and to show you how beautiful the flowers are. This is a L. Sagonia blue butterfly that is in severe decline also in California. And here is black sage, which is one of the most valuable plants for native pollinators. And there's a saying, if you plant black sage, quail will come. I did, and now I have families of quail in my pollinator garden with 4 little babies last night that I saw. These two are two plants that love California. Here is my apricot mallow. I wanted to show you this one because in designing habitat and establishing your habitat, in focusing for spring bloomers, because you are living in priority area number 1, to look for those plants such as desert apricot mallow here that don't go dormant in the winter, because those plants often push out bloom quicker. And so to look for those plants. And of course, another, if it says desert, it's going to be where once it's established for your area, even mine, inland, it does not need water once it's established, just natural rainfall. It is one tough plant and absolutely gorgeous, a high monarch value plant, and it pushes out bloom early. So remember in your design to really look for, in your area, those early spring bloomers and of course fall. And remember to plant in mass. This is some pestamine that I have in my pollinator garden. And remember when I talk, don't plant one plant, plant many, because monarch butterflies, pollinators, they like to go to continually the same flower. Now we're talking about the 4 seasons, why that's so important. Winter blooming, early spring blooming is, we've talked a lot about that. A spring bloom, summer, coyote mint. This one is so pretty and smells so great, and valuable goldenrods for the late fall. This, as we talked about, is so important for them to fuel up, build their resources to survive the winter. They're building their reserves and they're going to need a lot when those temperatures drop to stay and carry, and they're going to be living for quite a few months. So those fall plants, blooming plants, when they come back to the California coast. Here's the goldenrods up close, and Pacific aster, which are two plants great for priority 1 and high monarch value plants. Beach strawberry, we sometimes pass over how valuable these small flower plants are, but look at all that nectar in here. This plant should have been planted beach strawberry instead of highway ice plant, which is an absolute invasive even on the plant right list. We should have concentrated on getting this, and of course it has runners and spreads, beautiful leaves, beautiful native plant, absolutely what we should have had instead of the highway ice plant. Here, native plants, why I am really needing to talk about this is signs are so helpful for education and outreach. When you do all that work to establish monarch habitat and pollinator habitat gardens, these spark interest and conversation and often speak to your community when you're not there and somebody isn't available to explain about what you're doing in your front yard or your gardens establishing habitat. They'll notice perhaps a difference, but these signs have been shown to be so beneficial for outreach and to also inspire others. I put California Native Plant Society website here, where that's where you purchase them, besides your local California Plant Society website that I did. And again, they're something that is mailed to you. Xerces has a new one too that recently came out that can help do outreach and inspire others, and they make signs, both California Native Plant Society and Xerces, really beautiful. This is chandeliering when monarchs roost in the overwintering sites. This photo was taken in PG, and monarch chandeliering. I know there's a lot of bad news that I gave about Western monarchs. Where do we go from here? What I really want to leave you with is much can be done. It's not hopeless. And that's what I want to leave you with. There is also currently the Monarch Act and the Monarch Highway Act in review. It's in review session in Congress, and will be awaiting to reach a vote. So please reach out to your representatives and let them know that you would like them to support the Monarch Act and the Monarch Highway Act. It will, this link that I said that we don't have time to get into detail about, will go through all what the funds and the different resources of what will help to conserve monarchs if these two acts get passed. And here is the most important thing, the two things, if I could leave you with in conserving monarchs and how to help, is to become a community scientist. A community scientist is somebody who observes monarchs, keeps a lookout for them, and your observations are incredibly needed to not just be on the lookout, but observe, but then to enter your observations where you either saw milkweed or a monarch in any life stage. That includes from an egg to instars to breeding pair of monarchs. This data helps monarch scientists to know where monarchs actually are in California. That's really valuable information. And in what life stage. That data helps them to know where to put resources, and also even citing milkweed and where milkweed is important data. To know where milkweed is growing could be where we are trying to develop migrating corridors for them, so milkweed is needed here, and then that group could sometimes get funding. Different, like the one I mentioned, the Sierra group I spoke with today, they were awarded 3,500 milkweed verticularis. So it really helps the scientists to know what is needed where. This data is, the observations are so important. And of course, the two things, establishing habitat, planting native milkweeds and native nectar plants, that we talked a lot about. And then how do I enter those data? The observations. Here's where you go to Monarch Milkweed Mapper and iNaturalist, which is an app for your phone. And a photo is needed. It has to be photo evidence. They can't take where, okay, I saw this. They need a photo. It could be a blurry photo. So, you know, keep those phones with you and just snap a photo, even if it's blurry. And then these two websites will show you how to load your photo and valuable data in. That community scientists can save the monarchs. It is that important. It can't happen without. And then there are many publications. These are my two favorites that I use the most of my plant. So that one slide of your conscious plant choices. So I put a plant in the ground and it's, can it support wildlife or not? These two publications really help us in our farm of what we're planting and how much wildlife it's supporting. And with these severely declining pollinator species, I use those two a lot. And then I want to leave you with this photo. The first time I saw it, it was taken by my friend Connie. She's a docent at PG, an amazing community scientist. She counts at the overwintering sites. She took this photo in PG at the sanctuary, the PG sanctuary, on a Monterey cypress. And it's a male monarch, as you can see. Its veins are thin. Here is its pheromone sac. It is aged. Its wings are brittle, broken off perhaps from wind or a predator. But I want to leave you with this photo to give you hope that monarchs are resilient. They can recover. When I saw this photo, because I'm often reading and studying, and of course I have to, and it can get a little sad to know what happened to them. When I was a child on the Monterey Peninsula, as you know, you start Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, kindergarten on, monarchs are in your curriculum constantly from the minute you start the school district. And I would overlook and see thousands of monarchs overhead as a child coming to the overwintering sites on the Central Coast. And when I saw this photo, I said, they are so resilient, but so are we. And so it inspires me to work harder and to not give up and to realize there's a lot that still can be done. We haven't done it all. Or I'm not going to give up and many other conservation groups out there and community scientists aren't. So I want you to know they're resilient, and there's a lot that's going on with so many groups. People are not giving up. So let's keep engaging and establishing habitat to make a difference. And thank you so much for your time listening. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Hi, Kim. Thank you. That was delightful, very informative. And thank you very much. Just
Thank
for
you,
folks,
Mila.
thanks for those folks who may not be familiar with PG. PG is just Pacific Grove, which is literally down the coast and right beside Monterey. So just in case you weren't too sure what PG was, PG is Pacific Grove.
I'm so sorry. I should have said that. You know, when you're a local, when you grow up there, that you only call it PG, and I have to remember that. Okay, Pacific Grove on the Central Coast. Thank you for clarifying that. Hello, yes.
Let me get. Let's see. Side by side.
Yeah, I can kind of see some of the questions. Okay, yeah. Is it going to be available later? Yes. Mila recorded it.
Just a sec. Let me get this going. All right.
Sure.
I usually facilitate this part.
All righty.
Let's see. So Scott is making a comment about the fact that he was introduced to monarchs on milkweeds in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. And of course, as we well know, we do have the Eastern monarchs and the Western monarchs, as Kim was saying.
Yeah.
And both populations have suffered stupendous declines. And that's why we're hoping that they will be listed on the Endangered Species Act. It's on hold still, but we're all the organizations that can do litigation and push for that type of action. They're hoping beyond all hope that they will get it on the Endangered Species Act, and they will get monies and for protection and so on and so forth.
You know, I do want to add to that conversation a little bit. Insects don't get the love. It is much more challenging to get an insect on an endangered species list. Ag really fights that, as the 4 bumblebees that were petitioned to get on the endangered species list for California. And the Almond Board and a few others fought that, and it is being appealed if that was lost. Insects don't get the love. It is very challenging because insects move around a lot, and what will be affected. So we have to be aware that sometimes we can't wait. That's why community scientists are so important. We can't wait sometimes for that because the challenge is so great. Now, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife did put Western monarchs on the threatened list. So actually, it is illegal to handle a Western monarch in California. That is unique for our state. They are put on this threatened list, and one would have to have a permit to handle them. So there's no handling and touching of Western monarchs because the numbers are so low.
And then there is a question from Scott regarding Ardenwood Historic Farm in Fremont. Do the monarchs migrate through there?
Fremont, California? Yes, they do go through Fremont. Of course, it will they land? Again, depends on, if you plant it, will they come? Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with Ardenwood, if they've established habitat there and what they are growing there. Perhaps Scott can maybe elaborate on that. And I can also look on like iNaturalist and different things to see there is if community scientists have entered any data there. So I would have to investigate that a little bit.
Yes, iNaturalist is a remarkable tool, and the more of us who have that on our iPhones or whichever phone we have that can take photos and upload these photographs to the scientists for for recognition. And
so true, and it's such a great idea too of a plant or a species. So if you don't have iNaturalist on your phone, it is so useful. I recommend it.
So, Sandy is mentioning something about the effects of electromagnetic fields and radio frequency radiation on butterflies. Do you know anything about that?
You know, there's a lot of studies with monarchs and their migration, magnetic fields. They use the sun, the tilt of all of that. There is one study, I can send you the links, the link of that is studied. Of course, it's important to remember that when studies are done on monarchs, it's usually done on captive monarchs and not wilds. So when you're studying a captive monarch and a wild, there can be a few differences depending on what the study is of how it is affecting that butterfly. So keep that in mind, that most monarch studies of this type will be done on a captive monarch.
And then okay, and then Monica is asking again if you would be kind enough to repeat the part about the airflow bag. Is there a specific airflow bag to save the seeds?
Oh, the blossom bag, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Monica, what I recommend doing, and you can get them online, Amazon, or a craft store such as Michael's or Joann's, and it's the wedding favor bags. You can buy them in bulk, and you could buy blossom bags from some garden sites, but it's basically the same thing. So it's just ribbon or a string, twine, and you cinch it up and it comes sewn in. So I would probably try your local craft store, and those are very easy to find at a craft store, and just they come in a good quantity, because on your milkweed plant you're going to have quite a lot of seed pods, so you do want quite a few. Did that answer that question for you, Monica?
Well, you you went back to it, so I think that should be hopefully if satisfactory. If not, I'm sure she'll put something in the comment section.
Thanks.
And then again, along the coast, Shauna is wondering why we shouldn't plant milkweed along the coast.
Okay. First of all, it wasn't historically, milkweed historically wasn't grown along the coast. That means that originally it was never there. It was introduced by people. So it didn't natively grow there, historically grow there. But what is being studied and what has been learned in studies is that milkweed planted along the coast can quite interfere with migratory behavior, especially in our climate where even some of our native milkweeds are not naturally dying down in the winter like they would. Milkweed dies once a certain temperature happens, except that non-native milkweed tropical. And if you plant milkweed along the coast, there is a study that shows that it can bring monarchs out of reproductive diapause. Now, most monarchs are brought out of reproductive diapause by environmental factors, mostly temperature, but this study has shown that it, and I had the link on that slide, that it can interfere with their reproductive diapause and also their migration.
Mm-hmm. Well, with climate change occurring at the rate it is, there may be changes to what monarchs and other butterflies may be requiring too. We don't quite know everything in that regard, but plants are going to be, their location and the type of plant that's going to be growing in various locations is going to change. So we'll have to see, just like Meredith is saying that he has lots of monarchs in his Berkeley neighborhood in the late summer and into January. And is it really that bad an idea if the monarchs stay around in Berkeley rather than heading down further south in order to be in their reproductive areas further south in Pacific Grove, Monterey, and in that neck of the woods?
Yeah, that's a great question, Meredith. We're asked this a lot. What's so bad about having a resident population, a population that doesn't migrate? Well, first of all, it's not ideal if they don't migrate. The main reason is the infection load is so much higher on a population that does not migrate. Studies have been shown time and time again that people are not cutting down the non-native tropical milkweed to the ground like they are often asked to cut it down by the end of October. They're not doing it. And this study that I mentioned from a very well-known monarch scientist, highly respected, studied tropical and monarchs breeding on it and not going into reproductive diapause, and it was very confirmed the devastating effects that this one plant is doing because it is so heavily purchased by hand raisers and sold by big box stores, so systemically treated. The studies are being done. How is this one plant then weakening their immune system? Also, one plant can make a difference. Now we have resident monarchs migrating with wild monarchs, breeding with wild monarchs, and some studies have shown that the genetics are weakened from a resident population to a migrating population is not as strong as the migrating wilds. So when we are in such low numbers, we don't really have the luxury to make these kinds of mistakes anymore. And it's hard to get everybody on the same page about this one plant. It has become very controversial because the hand rearers want it. and it's become very problematic. And ideally, we want a migrating population. Are we going to keep a migrating population? A lot of scientists say that we're losing them. We're losing our wild migrating monarchs.
Thank you, Kim. In regards, with regards to Naomi's question about this whole 5 mile from the coast, that we don't have, we shouldn't be planting milkweed. The question is, with 5 miles, how do we calculate? This is Oakland,
Yeah.
Berkeley, Alameda. Where exactly is this 5 mile limit that you're talking about?
Yeah, one could get in their car and go 5 miles in. So we don't want people to get too hung up on this. It's just to be cognizant that if you live close to the coast, could you, in planting milkweed, be changing their breeding behavior and their migratory behavior? So that 5 mile guideline rule is pretty flexible, but just say, am I close to an overwintering site? I'll send you the list to the link of where the overwintering sites are in California. So, you know, up north, it's not as plentiful, but yes, there are. And you just want to be very mindful of, do you live by an overwintering site? Are you putting milkweed in a location where nectar would be such far better choice than milkweed, because they need nectar as much as they need milkweed. And so along the coast, what's really needed is nectar. There's a lot of other places in California that can plant milkweed, but along the coast, and as they're leaving the overwintering site and coming back to build up those reserves to survive the winter, they need nectar.
So how many generations does it actually take in order for the migrating population to reach their destination, so to speak?
About 4. What will be returning is like great grandparents. So it depends on the condition and the length of time, but it's about 4 generations, could give or take.
It's the same thing for the Eastern monarchs, or do they have a longer way to go?
Yes.
About three or four generations.
They yeah, they have a long way to go, but it's about the same. And there's a jet stream, and of course, I don't know if I talked about this, but that last generation, which is called the super generation, that is going to be able to live months. That generation is different than the ones that migrate up north and come back down south. And the eastern population is far into Mexico, where and of course that population is in decline too. They base theirs by acreage of monarchs, and it's far less than it used to be. So they start deep in Mexico and go up to Canada. They're not always going so far north. Some studies are showing that sometimes they're not going as north as we thought. There are just a lot of changes that are happening. In the east, there's a lot of weather patterns that are really affecting them. The freeze in Texas, the different climate changes affecting the easterns with hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding. it's going to be dependent on what weather they're going to face. There will be heavy breeding in the east, and then they're finding not that much of a quantity like they saw breeding in the east, in Michigan, Ohio, all of that. They're not seeing those numbers returning, and that perhaps they are being lost on the return. So there are unknowns studies. As much as this iconic butterfly has been studied, there are still a lot of unknowns out there.
Mm-hmm. And the question that dealt with the electromagnetic fields and radiation, that definitely, as Sandy is stating, is they do damage and kill the butterflies. I mean, I think they would probably kill anything that's flying through if you're going to get that type of field through which you must fly, and they usually fly through whatever they have to in order to get through. So yeah,
right.
They are going
Look
to
at the wildfire smoke, when the Paradise Fire, that was what even got into the 800 range, what survived that. We're really not sure. And then there was one wildfire smoke that was done, and I think the number got up to 100, not much more than that. And of course, they're exposed to so much more than sometimes what they're tested under. So we have to keep that in mind too, that these tests that are done might not be the reality of what they're facing when they're migrating.
and then BJ is saying, well, we're going back to the question of nectar plants that grow well in containers, since they don't have a garden area or a patio or whatever, but they have a sunny patio but no yard. So again,
I love this question. I love this question because I have a relative, and she was in an upstairs apartment on a patio, and she just called me one day and said, what do I plant? Just asked what I plant. So I told her the buckwheats, California fuchsia, just sock in, as much as you can, and she'll show me a flower. She had a monarch land on her buckwheat the other day. They're just in pots. So anything that can, when you look at those plant lists, if you have a plant that's 2, even 3 feet, just try it in a pot. If it's not a shrub, it's probably going to survive. Just remember, you want to try to get, if you can, a soil that says there are some garden centers that have it, native plant soil. Plant it in that, keep it adequately watered, and say you like echinacea. Remember, it doesn't have to be a native, but we do need to get to that biodiversity native plant rule, 70% natives, 30% non-natives. But say it could be a buckwheat, a California fuchsia, a gum plant, an echinacea, anything that stays under 2 to 3 feet, give it a try. But there are many plants. Look for those small single petal flowers for pots, like asters, gumweed, tidy tips, blue-eyed grass. When you get that plant list, you'll see so many possibilities that one never dreamt that you can grow well in a container. It's amazing. And I've even grown in a container a sage one time, and it did really well. And they can get huge, but it was a particular sage, and I really wanted it in this particular spot, and had the sun and light requirements, and it lived for quite a few years before it needed to then be planted in the ground. So don't let like those small spaces or those only can plant in a container stop you from getting nectar out there.
And Kim, there is a question about something about a plant maybe 30,000 milkweed plants, and that's, do you know about that? The plan to plant 30,000 milkweed plants?
Could you repeat that question? I think I'm knowing what the question is, but
Adrian said he read or saw something about a plan to plant close to 30,000 milkweed plants.
Yeah, I may not remember the exact number, but a very large number of plants.
Yeah, River Partners, it's a conservation group, was granted some funds to get 30,000 milkweed plants in the ground. One of the people that they work with was the Sierra group that I spoke with, gave a talk with today, that I presented, that they were given 3,500. So there's funding for this group they were awarded these funds to get milkweed in. They guaranteed they could get them planted and have teams. And that's where that 30,000 milkweed happened. And there's different places throughout California. They are working with Xerces, and there are biologists deciding in that priority area where to put them, especially for the migrating corridor. So there's gaps, you know. Yes, we need milkweed, but we really need to also talk about that a lot of people will contact me and say, Kim, I have a lot of milkweed and it's not getting visited. If you saw the amount of milkweed I have, and I saw 3 last year, no eggs, we're not going to save them by planting milkweed alone. It's a very multi-issued effort, like we talked about before, protecting our overwintering sites, getting real home gardens to understand conscious gardening, and am I going to put a plant there that supports our native pollinators, and also the pesticides. In our home gardens, collectively, we use more pesticides than the whole state of ag. We even surpass that. We need to understand that when we get our pesticides out, what we're actually doing, and there's alternative methods. I have 10 acres. I do not use one pesticide on our property. I haven't since we own the property, but now I have biodiversity established, and I just never use a chemical on the property. It is possible to achieve that, but we have to understand that milkweed alone isn't going to save the crash. It's going to take more than just planting milkweed. I'm not saying milkweed isn't needed, but we have to understand it can't be that alone.
Well, it's a multi-pronged attack that has to be done by all means. When any creature is at such a low number, you're up against Mount Everest to bring it back. I mean, the numbers.
It is.
And genetically.
And we can only, it will only happen collectively. And that's why I talk so much about nectar, because a lot of us will see plants out there, flowering plants, but they might not even be plants that provide nectar. We need to get more habitat established, which is milkweed and nectar, but it's just far more than milkweed. That's why when people along the coast, they really want to get that milkweed in because they're helping them. They feel, you know, and it's great intentions, but I want them to know, but you have so much within you besides just milkweed to help them.
Yeah.
And there's like we talked about in the presentation to you, that there's a lot that can be done besides just milkweed.
Right. So between corridors and planting more than one particular pollinating plant, we you know, no pesticides, lots of things that we should do and think about, and make sure that our neighbors have something too, where the insects can have something to eat, and it's
True.
not just a one shop stop, so to speak.
Right. And not to talk about, you know, the monthly visit from your house being sprayed. My house isn't sprayed monthly. I don't need that. Spiders kill pests. Those spiders are beneficial. We kind of have to train our eye that our yards aren't, you know, spotless, and I look at that as sterile. I want, you know, a garden like I see here off to the left. I want that kind of filled look and habitat, and where, you know, quails can hide and maybe even have a nest there. I don't want that green yard with everything's trimmed. We kind of have to, in order to save these declining species, we have to train our eye and our aesthetic to not be so hung up on what is ideal. The ideal is messy. The ideal is, oh, there's a spider there. That spider is now eating something that could be a pest. We also are killing off lacewings that are such beneficial insects that eat a lot of aphids by our mosquito sprays. We could kill mosquitoes by putting a bucket of water and some straw, let it sit for a few days, and do one of those mosquito dunks in the bucket, and that could kill far more mosquitoes if all of us did that. That's why I talk about so much. We have to do it collectively, talk to our friends and family, train our aesthetic. We can have homes without monthly or weekly sprays. We are killing beneficials with those routinely sprays. You could be killing lacewings, things that are going to be taking care of those pests for you. Until we change our outlook in those topics, we're gonna be fighting a salmon upstream battle to save these declining beneficial pollinators.
Kim, thank you so much for all the answers and the in-depth answers that you've given us. I think we have a lot to think about and a lot to do, and hopefully you've put us on the right path. So again, many thanks. It's time to, I think, draw this to an end and have everyone go and have some dinner. So including you. So
thank you too. It's been such an honor to be invited to speak to your fantastic group. I hold it dear, and thank you so much for the opportunity and for everyone to listen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks you. And do you mind if I give out your email or?
No, that's okay. Absolutely, that's okay. And I'll send those links to you too, as soon as I can, hopefully by tonight.
Okay, thanks a million.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye.
So let's see.